how's it going? So I'll show you the problem with objects, because when you re-render the component, object references change. Okay, so let me show you first. Let object, well, we'll call it my object. My object equals name Dmitry. Okay. So here lies the problem. If you put this as a dependency, it will infinitely re-render. So why does that happen? Because on the first render, this is like x0, xx. Well, x0, 1. Next re-render, well, let's just put it x0, x, like this. Now, component re-renders, object gets recreated. Next reference is like this. useEffect calls the senses that the object has been changed. It re-triggers the count. Set useState re-renders again. This object becomes like this because it gets recreated. useEffect sees that it has reference has been something has changed, which is the reference, and it runs the count again. So this is an infinite hoop. So how do we avoid it? We use useMemo like this. Like so. Well, we'll probably want to return this thing, so. Whoopsie. You can put like brackets like this in here if you want. Okay, so now you will see that this problem has been solved, because now what happens is, you see, no more re-renders. That's because this thing stays as, so when re-render happens, it's still x0, xx, and then this thing is like, oh, there was no change. Because think about the problem. The problem was that this thing kept changing, and this caused this to trigger infinitely. So now, because this is consistently the same, there is no more re-renders. Alright? So now the next problem are functions. Functions basically are exactly the same. So these are objects, and these are functions. So basically functions are it's TypeScript, so I need to put that anything. If you're JavaScript, you don't need. Well, let me just return like this arg. Okay. Now what happens? What happens is that when we put it in here, we're gonna call it with 2. It will infinitely re-render. Oh, because it returns 2. Hold on a sec. Oh, no. Yeah. So now we get an infinitely rendering function, like infinitely rendering, you see? It's constantly running. Now, why does that happen? Again, because functions are objects by themselves. Okay? So in order to stop this from happening, so you just want to make sure that this function does not run infinitely. Well, does not get recreated infinitely, right? What you do is you wrap it inside useCallback. React use callback like this. So now this problem gets solved. So you see, like the function no longer, the reference in the memory no longer changes. So you see, this thing stopped happening. So now it's only all the time like this. So that's your use callback. So most of the time, to be honest with you, you want to use useMemo and then run the function inside the useMemo, and then that's about it. Yeah. So like the fundamental difference between like useMemo cannot accept arguments, but useCallback can. But most of the time you won't basically use memo, to be honest with you. Okay, so final use case I'm going to cover is that, okay, let's say you have a function and you have something like let's say final output, okay? And final output is going to be my function, which is called with 3. And let's say, I don't know, this 3 comes from some kind of API, and you want this thing to only run when this 3 changes. Okay, well, bottom line, you only want this thing to run when final output changes. Okay? But since now it's 3, it will never change. But the problem is, it will still run. So I'll show you, you see? You see the function is still like it's covered with use callback, so the function reference does not change, but it's still running on every re-render. So here lies the problem, okay? If the function is very, very heavy, so something like a slow function like this, which takes a very, very long time to render, to run, you will run into a problem where your UI is very, very slow. Because the function keeps running and running and running and running all the time on every render. The reference does not change, but it still runs. Okay? So then well, let me show you an example of this. Let's just put the slow function into here. Call it with 2. So you see this function is going to run, trigger console log, run this function, which is like, it's like iterations up to million, couple of millions I think, and then return the argument, right? So you will see that now UI is gonna get very slow. So you see? So you see the problem is that because the function keeps running and running and running, this makes UI very, very slow. Okay? So now the question is, okay, so how do we stop this function from constantly running? And that's where, as I told you before, 99% of the time you want to use useMemo. So here's how to handle this. So we are going to, okay, so let me just think. So you see this final output, just put it into React, useMemo, whoops. And then return it. And then that's it. That's your solution. Because think about it. And now your UI is like omega fast. Now on the first rotation it's going to be very slow because the function is running. You see it's like super slow in the beginning. But then it's like super fast. Because the function is no longer running. And the reason for that is because it runs one time. useMemo records the what you call it, the output, and then that's it. It no longer runs it ever again, unless there's some kind of dependency. So, two differences between useMemo and useCallback is that one is that useCallback can accept arguments. useMemo cannot. Okay, just bear that in mind. useCallback can, useMemo cannot. But useMemo does not run stuff inside of it on every re-render. But useCallback does. So that's two differences. So the question is, why do you realistically need useCallback? And the answer is, you don't really need it, because you can create a hook which will just do the same shit as useCallback, only with useMemo. I'm gonna show you how you do it. It's gonna be a difficult code, but because you see, like, you don't want to wrap every single function with useCallback and then wrap every single output with useMemo. It's like you're gonna be like, how do I do it in one go? And the answer is very simple. It's not really simple. It's simple for me, I think, at this stage, but for a beginner it's gonna be hard. Okay, so let us just move all of this mumbo jumbo into here. Okay, so let's create my custom hook. So this is gonna take arguments, which is gonna be any. Okay, so now in here we need to return useMemo. Okay, and then useMemo is going to run only if arguments. Well, we don't even need argument change. Just like the reason why we're doing custom. Well, let me just show you solution to the problem. It's gonna be disgusting shit. It's like the worst programming video on the internet. But like, what can I do? It's complicated. Okay. All right. Okay. So what do you want to do first? Let my function hook, let's call it like this, hook, okay, is equal to React useMemo. We call the memo, right? And then we're gonna return. We're gonna write the function in here. Where's the function? Yeah, there's the function here. So our function is basically, let's just write the function. So function, did we call it? My function. Yeah, we'll call it my function. So this is argument any, and then return argument. Console. We also console log triggered it, and we also run the small function like this. So now we're gonna run my function. With an arg. And then we're gonna return, well, we just want to return the. So here lies the problem. Since useMemo does not accept arguments, there is no way for us to get this argument into the useMemo. Like, there's no way to do it unless you create a hook. Okay? So what are we gonna do? We're gonna take all of this mumbo jumbo. Alright. We're gonna create a hook, which is gonna be called hook args. And then we're gonna return this entire useMemo. Now, for hook to be a hook, you need to start it with use. Okay? So now this hook arguments is how we get the argument inside the useMemo. Oh my god, this stuff is so complicated. Did I lose anyone? I lost everyone. And this can be const actually. So now we can just do let final output equal to call the hook and put any argument into it. So let's put 3. And now you basically have kind of like a, how to say, a hybrid of a useMemo with useCallback, because you have a function inside useMemo that runs one time and then it returns the value of the function and no longer runs. You can put dependency if you want, like if the argument changes, if this argument changes, we can run it, but if it doesn't change, it doesn't. And now, there you go. You see, so it's gonna be slow on the first one, and now it's gonna be super fast. So you see, it's no longer triggering. Like the function is just no longer triggering. So because you have to remember that useCallback, if you just take a function and wrap it inside useCallback, it will still run on every render, and that's the problem. All right. So ideally, you just want to run the function on the first render, save the value, and just return that value. And this is exactly what this hook does, right? Now, normally, if you don't have an argument, it's piece easy. Just run the function in the useMemo, because there's no problem with putting argument into it. It just returns it, whatever, it's done. So this will be something like, this will look something like this. Let's just run this function here. Oh shit, it has a... Well, okay, let's have a function that is const. Well, let's do const. My function equals. This is without argument, right? So this function has no argument. So what do we want to do? We basically want to just run this function inside useMemo. Okay, so what do? We just const my function memo is equal to react useMemo, and then just run the whole function in there. So just copy it into here. So there is your function. Whoopsie, I forgot about this. And then just run it. So my function like this. And then it will be So you see, it's going to just trigger one time, and then that's about it. Oh, whoops. What did it say? It said any... Oh, it's complaining about dependency. Yep. There you go. My function memo, okay. Oh, whoopsie. I'm trolling. My apologies. Yeah. So you see, it runs one time and it's no longer triggered more than once. Because remember, useCallback will run the function on every render. useMemo, whatever is inside of it, does not run. So that's kind of like one of the core differences between useCallback. Whatever is inside of it is still going to run. It's just that the function reference does not change. So that's kind of... Honestly, I think useCallback is kind of useless, because all it does is prevent this from happening. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like what's realistically, like, what is the big benefit from this? Ideally, like, it just doesn't really help you too much, you know? Unless the function is like... The problem is with useCallback is that it always runs, and you don't want it to run. You want it to stop from running. And the way to do that is to either use memo if the function does not have an argument, or create a custom hook so that you can get argument into useMemo. Because, like, the only purpose of custom hook is just to get the argument into here, so you can run it, and probably as a dependency as well. Outside of that, like, there's literally no reason to use a custom hook. That's what I'm saying. Most of the time, 99% of the time, you probably want to use memo. Okay? Worst video on YouTube for, but what can I do? I mean, it's a complicated topic. I take care. And I'm not a full-time explainer, you know, I'm a full-time programmer. I don't really explain for a living. I solve bugs and build stuff for a living. Okay, take care, bye-bye.